They may be different locations, but it will still all be in the same world, and they will be connected to each other as well.
So there is a chance that Tom Holland as Spider-Man will pop up somewhere over there?
Chance.
There's always a chance.
There's always a chance.
So Spider-Man is once again in the news. You know why? Because everyone wants Spider-Man back in the MCU. So before this video started, you would have seen an old clip from Amy Pascal, who was head of Sony, talking with Kevin Feige. And she's talking about the whole universe being one concurrent universe. And Kevin Feige looks confused when she talks about potentially Venom and Spider-Man being in the same universe. And Kevin Feige is like, what the... He doesn't want this to happen. Why am I saying this? Because at the moment, the most recent deal is allegedly, rumoredly, they've offered the MCU Venom and 30% of Spider-Man. But from this interview, back from Spider-Man Homecoming, Kevin Feige does not look like he's interested in Venom at all. So what is good, YouTube? WarStew here. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to never miss any videos. Also check out warstew.com, which will be in the first link in the description. So Spider-Man back in the MCU is hitting the headlines this, well, it's always hitting the headlines. So what is interesting is Spider-Man could come back to the MCU. We've said this from day one because there is still negotiations going on. So recently this week, there's loads of articles going around the internet that essentially say Spider-Man back at Marvel if Apple buys Sony. So there's always been this rumor that Apple or Amazon or WarStew essentially is going to buy Sony, which doesn't really make any concurrent sense. But the only reason I'm doing this video is because an investor analyzer at Google Finance think they've found a big acquisition in the horizon for Apple. Listed the follow companies, well, mention of Sony. So on this list, it is very intriguing. On this list of acquisitions in order is A24 Studio, Lionsgate, Viacom, CBC, Sony Pictures, MGM Studios, Netflix, and then a potential gaming publisher that could be incorporated into Apple's streaming service or a separate gaming service as a wild card. So why this is interesting is anyone buys, Sony, then the rights would default back to Marvel, so that is the only way realistically that Marvel is going to get Spider-Man back without having to pay for anything. Regarding Spider-Man returning to Marvel if Apple does buy Sony, it has been reported that if Sony ever gets sold Spider-Man and related characters, Venom, Carnage, WarStew, etc., revert back to Disney and Marvel. But anyone knows that is basic business and contract attributes. If you buy something and another company buys it out, generally, whatever that deal is would push back to the original company. So that is the way that it's looking likely. But what is interesting is, if you remember a few years ago, it was rumored, I don't know why it was rumored. It was rumored that Amazon was maybe thinking about purchasing, the company themselves. So Spider-Man could return to the MCU if Apple does go ahead and buy Sony. But what is interesting about this whole debate is there isn't really any evidence, although, yes, investors, there's an analyzer saying that Sony Pictures is on the list of potential buys, but I don't really think that will happen. So the past few years, there have been mumbles of Sony Pictures possibly being sold as early in the year. It was reported that the head of Amazon was interested in buying the studio at one point. What's rather interesting about the potential of Apple buying Sony is that JJ, Mr. Star Wars, is said to have turned down a mega deal with Apple for Warner Media, which realistically doesn't make any sense. With one of the reasons being because of the concerns of Apple lacking the theatrical distribution model. If Apple does buy Sony, we'd see that problem would be solved pretty quickly. But the real reason why JJ's turned them down is because if JJ was going to work for Apple, he wouldn't be able to do Star Wars, would he? So selfish, not selfless. So presently, Spider-Man is back at Sony as new contract negotiations have failed to reach some kind of terms and conditions, which is really interesting because I guarantee once I post this video, maybe later this week or maybe next week, there will be new information that something else is coming out, which realistically doesn't have any concrete evidence. And now we're hearing rumors to do with Spider-Man PS4 maybe not being made on the PS4 I mean, they're even now saying the rights of the Spider-Man game could revert to any other company, when people don't understand that Sony does not have the right. Sony PlayStation doesn't have the rights to Spider-Man PS4. That was Marvel. Marvel owned the rights. Marvel just basically came to Sony and wanted Sony to make the game in collaboration with Insomniac Games. So I don't really get where that is coming. So essentially at the moment, it seems like maybe there's some kind of deal in the work, potentially. But what is interesting is they've recently revealed, you know, the digital download of Spider-Man Far From Home. But what is interesting, guys, is this does back up the claim that Spider-Man was going to be the face of the Avengers. He was going to be the face of the company, because it goes on about the future of Spider-Man in the MCU. And now that deal is done, it's dust. Now, why we don't believe here on this channel that the deal is over is because you remember, like, there's so many times this happened in history. You know, Fox said they weren't going to sell to Disney. Well, they sold to Disney. Of course, they're going to say talks aren't going on, even if they are. So the best case scenario would be that the MCU, some kind of ownership of Spider-Man, in the sense that it just allows the characters to be back in the MCU. I think the worst case scenario would be if Apple comes and buys the company, because then the rights just reserve straight back to Marvel. And then obviously Apple would have to deal with Sony, which, yes, as a massive Apple fanboy, iPhone fanboy, it would be pretty cool to get that money injection into Sony Pictures and into Sony PlayStation, but then they'd have to rename everything to Apple Pictures and Apple Console or something like that. So I don't really understand why multiple websites like CosmicBookNews.com, WeGotThisCovered.com, WarStew.com, they're all reporting the same story about Apple potentially buying the company. But Apple, Amazon, everyone's been buying Sony for the last couple of years, but this doesn't really make any sense to me, because Sony Pictures has been pretty profitable lately. You've got to look at the, obviously, Spider-Man Far From Home, 1 billion plus. Venom, 700 million plus. In Spideyverse was pretty successful. Yes, I know Men in Black. Reboot with, obviously, Thor, Chris Hemsworth, and etc. Valkyrie, main star Tessa Thompson. It flopped, but a studio isn't going to bang every time it releases a movie. Just look at Marvel. I mean, not every Marvel movie was financially successful. So you got to take all these rumors with a pinch of salt, but I do really think it would be interesting if a massive company did come out and buy, you know, Sony, because it will make Sony PlayStation better, it will make Sony Pictures better, but at the moment, I don't really think there's any validity in this. But then at the same time, if you got to think if a company is going to come out and buy Sony, the biggest attribute at Sony Pictures would be Spider-Man, so it really wouldn't work. Maybe Sony could get new investors from Apple. Maybe that would be a better scenario. When Apple chucks a load of money at them and buys a part of Sony, then they would still keep the rights to Spider-Man. But I am seeing these articles and these stories that appear all over the internet still, even though it's been a couple of months now, well, a couple of weeks, a couple of months people have been talking about Spider-Man not being in the MCU, when realistically, guys, nothing has actually changed. There are no plans for Spider-Man in Phase 4 at the moment. Like we said before, guys, even if this is set in stone, it will literally make no difference to the main narrative going forward. And as we reported before, the Russo bros having word with Sony Pictures going, yo, give Spider-Man back. You don't know what to do with him. Really, the Russo bros are irrelevant when it comes to MCU content now, unless they come back again, which realistically, guys, I really hope they don't come back. There's also the rumor of Joss Whedon coming back for X-Men, which realistically, yeah, he did a really good job with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but Justice League, you flopped, Joss Whedon. You really flopped. You ruined a great story with Darkseid. Not you personally, obviously. Warner Bros. Put a lot of pressure on people, but Age of Ultron, was it a really good movie? No, it wasn't. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens going forward. With the Spider-Man character, there's been a lot of kind of boycotting, people saying, well, I'm not going to watch the next Spider-Man movie. When you know you're going to watch it, it really is ridiculous. You're going to watch it just so you control it. Even if you guys don't like it, you will watch it. So there is a lot of stories coming out from both Marvel and DC So I will be reporting a lot of this stuff on the YouTube channel and also on the website. So make sure to check it out, guys. And if this channel ever hits 100,000 subscribers, I will be giving away a PS4 Pro with Spider-Man PS4 Game of the Year edition. Don't worry, the next one is coming out on the PS5, or an Xbox One X with Gears of War 5, just to say thank you to you guys who have supported the channel over the last couple of years. So I will be doing that if we ever hit 1,000 subscribers. But like I said, guys, that is the big achievement for anyone to hit. So like always, guys, please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll catch you in another video very soon. Catch you later.